What's up everyone, I'm so excited here to review one of my favorite issues of Forbes of all time. This issue actually interviews 100 of some of the hardest people in the world to get into contact with. Tons of billionaires, some that you recognize, like Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, Michael Dell, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and some that you may not recognize. Ka Shing, Carl Icahn, T. Boone Pickens, Ross Perot, Michael Bloomberg, Armani, Sheryl Sandberg, Mark Benioff, a lot of incredible people. And since I'm so much of a super fan of this billionaire world, I recognize a lot of these names, and I'm just so excited. There's even people that I would love to get more information about, but they're just so secluded that they rarely ever send anything out into the public. One of these people would be Peter Lynch. Peter Lynch is interviewed on here, and if you're not familiar with who Peter Lynch is, he is one of the top investors of all time, and he retired fairly early, and he worked for a company. And he made that company a lot of money through his investing. He wrote a couple books, but then he just kind of went silent. He's an incredible person. So I want to give you some highlights and a overall review of this issue of Forbes and some lessons learned. So let's start with one thing that I wish was better. Some of these essays, as they claim these to be 100 greatest essays, they're just a few paragraphs, sometimes a few sentences. The CEO of Twitter, he was extra, sparse. I think that's just his style. Jack Dorsey, he wrote like 2 sentences. But some of these are pretty meaty. I mean, some have a couple paragraphs, several paragraphs. They're not real essays, because essays would be longer, but nonetheless, I truly appreciate this information because it is rare, valuable information. Nowadays, information is so abundant, but the right information, like the information from these guys who you could spend your whole life trying to get a phone call with them and fail, it's all compiled here. I also learned that there's so many issues of Forbes with all this exclusive information from interviews directly with hard to reach billionaires going back 100 years. The first issue of Forbes was one where they were able to interview John D. Rockefeller. Some say he's the richest man in all of human history, or at least one of the richest men of all human history, inflation adjusted. And essentially, the founder of Forbes magazine, I don't know his first name, but his last name was Forbes. He released this magazine, and in the first issue, he did a profile where he interviewed not just Rockefeller, but a lot of people in his inner circle, and he went ahead and divulged what he found. So I found that incredibly valuable information, and it definitely makes me kind of want to go back in time and read all the issues of Forbes. Now, there was a period a couple years ago where I was really into all these magazines, Entrepreneur, Forbes, Fortune, Inc. And I was just, after a while, I just got very disappointed. It was a lot of, there's a lot of crappy issues where they just kind of pump crap out. So, but it still means there's good stuff if you look for it. Now, I think I want to jump to some of the highlights of what was said after reading many of these billionaire profiles. I think first off, no one bothers to do stuff like this. I don't think I've really met anyone in person who really bothers to kind of study billionaires like I do, like a fanatic. But you definitely see patterns after you do it for a while. There's a couple clear patterns just from this alone. One was a lot of them, especially the tech billionaires, they all emphasized how we are currently living in the next industrial revolution, and that we're just at the beginning of an incredible revolution. The computer age, the industrial age, the technology, whatever you want to call it, the internet age is just beginning. They emphasize that a lot. Mark Benioff, Michael Dell, Bill Gates, They all talked about that, and it was very interesting. It really got me thinking. Bill Gates, his little essay had a story in it where he was, you know, he talked about how he was at the start of the previous industrial revolution with the computers. And what spurred him to drop out of Harvard was he saw a magazine and the first personal computer was selling in it. And he turned to his partner and he realized, if we don't get on this now, we're not going to be we're going to miss out on the next industrial age. So there's a lot of stuff in here about just being aware of that and leveraging it so that you succeed. I mean, Michael Dell, who revolutionized computer manufacturing or the selling of computers, and then there's Mark Benioff, a billionaire behind Salesforce, one of the largest SaaSes in the world. SaaS stands for software as a service. Incredible people. These are people that you can trust, who have succeeded and done it. And so it really makes me think. There's also they also mentioned how important it is to really be present in the moment, be relevant now, because the future is going to change quickly, and you're going to be left behind if you don't stay relevant. They also talk about how asking yourself what you want and where you're headed, and then really like being present and working towards that is very important right now, because things are changing. We are at this new inflection point where artificial intelligence and biological research and computer processing power and autonomous cars, self-driving cars, all these things are converging, and it's a very exciting time. So I don't know what it means, but it really got me interested. I want to jump into what let's think. I want to jump into what was said by one of the wealthiest people alive today. This man, he basically, when he was starting out, he was one of the top salespeople for IBM, and he kept trying to convince IBM, hey, stop just selling these computers, also sell services to teach people how to use these computers. But IBM, this big giant at the time, was like, no. And I learned that his life changed by reading a quote. It's the quote that Tai Lopez mentions all the time, which is also surprising. The quote is, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." And that's by Henry Thoreau. This guy read it in a barber salon after being rejected by IBM. He was still the top sales guy, but he was like kind of, not feeling it. And he picked up a Reader's Digest, read the quote, and he's like, whoa, that's not going to be me. I'm not going to live that life. And that really resonated with me, because I think a huge theme to why I'm motivated is because of a similar thing. I don't want to live an average, desperate, mediocre life. And that's where I was headed in the past, and I'm striving to do something great, to live an extraordinary life. I'm not there yet, but really got me thinking and pondering. So then he went off to do some incredible things. He even invested $20 million in seed money in Steve Jobs after he was fired by Apple and started Next Computer. So it's an incredible story about this guy. Then I'm going to jump to some more value-driven stuff that I think is incredibly important. So John Paul DeJoria, another very successful, respectable billionaire, he chose, I think what they literally allowed these people to talk about anything they wanted to, because the topics range across the board, from what's happening in the future to how to succeed with a company, to values, to personal happiness. So John Paul DeJoria, he said in here that treat and pay your staff exactly the way you want to be treated. And he goes into all these stories about how, you know, he has so little turnover, how they've been able to stay in business for so long and be so successful. And they've been so incredibly good at what they do because the owners and managers were not greedy, and they made it very simple. They spread love to their products, to their employees, to everything, so that this was a role model. I'm going to read from here. Someone asked Francisco Alcaraz, the genius distiller creating all of our formulas for Patron, what is the secret? Why is Patron so good? Why do people keep coming back? He says the secret is very easy. It's called love. We are all treated so well. We love what we're doing. We never want to leave. We want every bottle to be reflective of this. I mean, I've watched a lot of interviews by John Paul DeJoria, and he definitely references this all the time about how you want to treat people, how treat others, how you want to be treated, how success unshared is failure. He says, you know, in all the businesses we're involved in, it's the exact same way. If you love your people and let them know you're giving back, not just hoarding all the money for yourself, they want to join in. And he really invests in his employees too. He caters their lunch and dinner, and he really he even built a chapel for his religious employees. So that investment in employees, I think, is critical. I think Google is another company that really understands that well. I'm going to jump into David Rubenstein. He is a incredible investor of the Carlyle Group, and they're a private equity group, and they invest in very specific, you know, DC government type stuff. There's a whole story that you can find on YouTube. He did like a speech, and the speech in it of itself was very interesting, but his whole point was that, like, you gotta use what you have. And so, like, you know, at first he was kind of bummed that, like, he was in DC while all the other big players when he started out were in, like, New York. But he was like, that turned out to be a huge blessing, because then he found all these weird niches that he could invest in, and that led to his success. And he was specialized and known as that guy who had these weird niches. So the point is, like, you know, use what you have. But what he says here is, you know, he talks about personal happiness, and he says this might be the most elusive thing in life. But then he goes into advice on how you can have personal happiness, and he says use the mom test. If your mother calls you and tells you that she's proud of what you're doing, that's probably a good indication. And then he goes on to say that his mom called him a lot more often when he was giving away money versus when he was earning it. So I think that is incredibly interesting. It's an incredible quote, and just something to ponder. I want to jump to Jeff Bezos. I mean, so many people, including Warren Buffett, have called him the best CEO of our era. He succeeded in 2 businesses, Amazon being the one everyone knows, and then the other one is his cloud services part of Amazon, which is also highly successful, where it's a bit complicated, but, you know, it's basically this huge bunch of computers that allow you to store data for pennies on the dollar, which is, of course, is incredibly useful, and he's able to do that because of the sheer size of it. But I'm rambling. The point is, he had this very short, you know, 3 or 4 paragraph essay, and I think it really just struck me. It's something that Gary Vaynerchuk talks about a lot. It's also something that I realized many years ago. I want to tell you what he said and then go even deeper into my own theories about this. So basically, Jeff Bezos, he said that nowadays, if a customer is unhappy with you, he'll tell 5,000 people. Back in the day, maybe he'll tell 50 people. And he says it's because of the internet and transparency and customer reviews. And then he goes into saying how this transparency is good for companies that embrace it and actually focus on really good products. And he said in the past, if you had a bad or mediocre product, you could get away with it with some really good marketing because there wasn't as much, knowledge transfer. Now that's changed, and he says this is really good for customers and society because they're not going to get scammed as much, and it's good for the companies who embrace it, which I think means that it's good for companies who actually focus on creating good products rather than like crappy ones with hidden drawbacks that scam you of your money. I want to go even deeper. First off, I don't think it's 50 people that they told in the past. I think, if you're really pissed off about a product, you would tell like maybe 3 people, maybe your mom, dad, a family member. Maybe you'll tell 5 people, like maybe you're at you're at a gathering with your friends, and then you just rant for like 10 minutes about how crappy something was that you bought, maybe a shirt or something. Nowadays, I think it's not 5,000. It can be tens of thousands, hundreds, or millions. I would say if you were to average it out across everyone, it'd probably be maybe thousands or maybe just a couple hundred. But you don't want to play the odds like an average, because you never know who is going to step into your restaurant these days. That next person who steps into your business, they could have 16 million followers. Now, again, I think one thing he forgot to Jeff Bezos didn't emphasize as much. He was more focused on customer reviews, but I'm sure he's aware. Social media is really the key thing. People love doing product reviews. And more so than that, people love just impulse ranting about how bad a company was to them, to their 16 million fans on Twitter and so on and so forth. And of course, anyone with 16 million fans, maybe 10% of them will actually read it, and then maybe 10% of those will actually care. So it's actually 160,000 that actually get impacted, but that's still a lot of people, and those people are secondary people who might even ripple it further to hit tertiary people. The point is, it's really bad. I mean, we've seen plenty of cases of this. Social media is it's an amplifier. It magnifies things. We've seen plenty of cases of this, including the rapper Iggy Azalea going off for like 30 tweets when the Papa John's delivery guy, took her phone number and gave it to like 10 of his friends without her permission. And she just went on and on Twitter about it, and that wasn't good. And then there's the case of, I think it was United Airlines or one of those low-cost airlines, where they like completely mistreated a doctor and physically like pushed him out of the the plane because they were overbooked. And that just blew up on social media. Like everyone picked it up. Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon. It probably reached tens of millions of people. In fact, I'm pretty sure it did. And that was horrible negative PR for them. And I was also very curious afterwards. The fact that Warren Buffett invested in such a company, and he made statements about it. And I just thought it was against his main philosophy, which was delighting your customers and choosing companies that delight your customers and have a competitive advantage. And I think maybe he was a bit more money driven on that investment, because the fact it was just not good. I know it was, but on the flip side, it can amplify in the opposite direction. So if you do something really good for a customer to the point where she cries or is very touched, they can share that with their family and friends on Facebook. Or maybe you never know. It could be that this guy knows someone who has tons of followers or is really rich, and then it just kind of spreads virally from there. So I think this is a good thing. I definitely agree with Jeff Bezos. I think it's important to look in the future and see how that ripples through. Likely it will lead to more transparency, and great companies who actually delight their customers survive and thrive, while those who are sketchy, it will destroy them in the long run. I mean, in the short term, there's still scams and stuff out there, and you never know. There's also essays in here by people that I've been dying to get any type of information from, but it's just really hard. Ka Shing is one of them. Ka Shing is kind of like the Warren Buffett of the Asian hemisphere. He's Not as rich as Warren, but like just as wise and successful in the investing sense. So Ka Shing, of course, he's Chinese, or maybe he's Taiwanese. He speaks Cantonese, not Mandarin. But the point is, I had very hard time getting any information or advice from him online. But I was very curious about him. From what I did gather online and from what I read in this article, first off, I'm just very thankful that this whole team went out there and did this for me. But here's what I learned from Ka Shing. In this article, he did a short essay on how he was always very conservative and cautious when others were greedy, and he specifically mentioned being cautious when others are over projecting and over hyping how much money a company will make in the future, in the short term and long term future. So he was very cautious about this, and this was with the 3G cellular network when that industry first started merging, and he was right. You know, a decade or more later, many of those companies and many of the people who made fun of Ka Shing, they were on the wrong side of it. They're now barely getting by, or they just disappeared. And the 3G companies, where he was cautious and very conservative with his estimates, succeeded. So from what I've heard and seen of Ka Shing, he's in many ways quite similar to Warren Buffett's investment style and John Templeton's, where it's a lot of conservative and realistic predictions, but more so than that, you know, the whole idea of being fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. Lee did something very similar to John Templeton did during the Great Depression, which was when there was a severe economic downturn. He invested in all the companies that he knew would survive and thrive and succeed when everyone else was wildly pessimistic. And he held on to those for years and years and years, and the rest is history. I could go on and on about this, but I'm losing my voice from just talking about this. I'm getting a sore throat. Check this out. A lot of good stuff in here. Jack Welch is in here. Elon Musk is in here. Check out all these names. Paul Allen also went off on wrong page. Paul Allen also went off on the future and how science and AI and human biology and personalization and large databases are really personalizing and revolutionizing healthcare in the future, and how profound this is and what's going to happen. There's also people on here who aren't billionaires, but just so happen to get on here. Russell Simmons is on here. Martha Stewart, I don't think she's no longer a billionaire. Oprah's on here. She is a billionaire. Yeah, Oprah and Martha Stewart are interesting cases. They are billionaires. One of the few who did it in I'm not going to say non-businessy ways, because they all use business, but they didn't do it by just kind of selling a product like, you know, toothpaste. They had a lot of they were in the entertainment industry in a sense, but then they kind of leveraged that. Sheryl Sandberg's in here. She is the COO of Facebook. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg is in here. Jack Welch is in here. Donald Trump is in here. A lot of great guys. As you'll notice, a large percentage of them are white Caucasian men who are old and balding. But I think things are changing, of course, likely due to economic, sociological, agricultural reasons, and blah, blah, blah. That's why most of these people are white males. But it's starting to change. You see this? Sheryl Sandberg, female in there, female billionaire. Oprah Winfrey, black female billionaire. She has a great quote in her book, Was it in her book or oh no, it was in a Stanford business Q&A session she had. You can find it on YouTube. She said like, yeah, I walk into a lot of rooms where everyone else in the room is a rich white man, and she said I did not get to where I did in society by looking at people and seeing their race. And I thought that was such a profound and deep quote. It's really the quote that has pushed me forward in the last couple years, when my insecurity about being one of the, if not the only Asian male in the room, which often comes up, this quote just, destroys. And of course, Bruce Lee is also one of my role models in that sense, in that area. I mean, just such an incredible guy, so charismatic, to the point where he was definitely in situations where he was the only Asian man probably in the whole building, and he just moved the room. He controlled the room. Charles Koch is in here. He is a billionaire in a industry that you're not familiar with, but the point is he's been consistently one of the richest people in the world with his brother for decades. But of course they fly under the radar. I think what he said just draws a lot of parallels in this issue of Forbes. He talked about mainly the importance of hiring someone who's ethical. So much so that he recommends hiring someone who is honest and ethical over someone who is talented, because that's what's going to matter more. And that just draws a lot of parallels, and I don't think people look for that when they're hiring. I really don't. And I know this because I've seen both sides of the hiring table for not many companies. I'm not some type of corporate executive, but I've seen a decent amount, and they just kind of go through the motions, but they don't really look for ethics and honesty as much as they should. And Warren Buffett has a very similar philosophy about this. He says, I hire people who are honest. No, what was it? I've hired people who are hardworking, smart, and honest. But if they don't have the last one, you don't want them to have the first two. Because if they are dishonest, you want them dumb and lazy. Because, if you're smart and hardworking but dishonest, the first two things turn against you, and they start lying and cheating your company and stealing your money. So, Charles Koch's essay is really something worth pondering in here, because he just goes deep in a small way. I think others will kind of just glance over what he said, but that quote really got me thinking, because it just triggered so many patterns and correlations there. And I think honesty and ethics, which is such a simple concept, just gets so overlooked. And he even goes into a couple of details about how that screwed him over, and he had to rehire many times and restructure his whole company. A lot of great people in here. Sarah Blakely, another female billionaire. Richard Branson's in here. A fabulous episode of Forbes. And Warren Buffett's on the cover. Well deserved. I mean, what I love about Warren, and I think a lot of people say this, is that the best things that you learn from Warren have nothing to do with business or money. And that's what I like a lot about him, and that's what a lot of people do. Everyone said that. Monish Pabrai, successful investor, said that. Bill Gates' wife Melinda said that. But it's so true. I mean, he deserves to be on the cover, not just because of that he's been one of the richest people in the world for so long, but because he's lived a good, honest, ethical, hardworking life. He's spent time with his family. He's promoted good values like following your passion over, suffering, doing something you hate. He's taught a lot about life success, and oftentimes it has nothing to do with money. He even has one of his newest favorite sayings has to do with your having the people you want to love you actually love you. and having children that love you being more important than wealth. He says, like, he has a saying that everyone happy he has known has children that love them. And I think that really speaks deeply, and I think, I mean, it gets emotional. There's definitely parents out there who have sacrificed too much and their kids don't love them. So, incredible issue. Thanks for watching. I hope you check it out. I think it will really help you in the future. Now, some of these things are very high level visionary stuff that may not ever have an impact on your life. I mean, I'm not some high flying entrepreneur. Most of you aren't as well. We're not gonna maybe revolutionize the world with, by grabbing the next technological industrial revolution by the nuts. But I think there's lessons in just life, in just daily practice that you can glean from this. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button. Let me know. Contact me on my blog if you have any questions or anything else you might need, and I'll see if I can help. See you guys later.